Hey everyone, it is time for another recitation, this time on our HTTP movies project, where we're going to be experimenting with our other REST verbs, put, and delete, and post, and all of those good things. So I have the project cloned and installed. I have my React project running and the backend server also running, and we can see here's my project. Our goal for today is to take this existing solution for querying a list of movies from the API, displaying those in a list. When we click on a movie, we can see the information for that individual movie. We want to add another route that will allow us to edit that movie's information and then post it to the server and then navigate back to our movies list and see the updated data in there, as well as getting our delete to work and also posting a movie. So there's a lot of ways of doing this, but right now I want to leverage how my application is currently set up. So if we look inside of source, we see our app.js has this state for our saved movies, and when I click on these, I can click save and it adds it there. But I don't really care about that too much. What I'm more interested in is how we get this list of movies and the data for this individual movie, because that is not stored within app. If we look, we're rendering two different routes, one for the movie list component and then one for the individual movies. Let's take a look at our movie lists. So this is a class-based component, but we can still read this pretty easily. We have movies within state on component did mount, which is going to run on the first render when our component is mounted to the DOM. We're querying the API for the list of movies and then placing that within our state. And we're also rendering that array of movies into components. I want to talk about component did mount and consequently use effect with an empty dependency array, because those are effectively the same thing. Oftentimes when discussing this, I've used the term on the first render, the first time our application renders this component. And that's actually slightly misleading. I'm going to add a console log here and say fetching movies. And let's look in our developer console, and we can see now how often this Axios request runs. And when we look at our console, we should see, unsurprisingly, that as soon as this loads, and as soon as I turn off my Slack notifications, we should see fetching movies show up, right? When we first get our app after the refresh, it goes and it fetches those movies. Now I'm going to click on The Godfather, and I'm going to go back to home. Fetching movies happen again. Right, but I thought that shouldn't, because we only do component did mount. We only do use effect with the empty dependency array on the first render. And that's where the term mounting becomes important. What that means is when our component is first packaged up and inserted into our page, that's mounting. When I navigate to Godfather, we're unmounting that component, right? We're no longer rendering the movie list component. We've removed it from our page. So now, when I navigate back to it here, you can see that delay in here. We're actually making that request again. We're remounting the component. So our Axios request runs again, and we have to get those movies back in the state of that component. So we can leverage this to get the updated data for our movie after our put. I don't have to manually change my state, because as soon as I'm done with my put, if I navigate back to movies, it's going to perform the get request again, and it's going to receive the updated data for my movies. So I can actually ignore this state within here. I will later touch on what happens if we want to do the state management ourselves, because this is a little bit wasteful. It's pretty fast because the API is running on my computer, but as we flip back and forth to home, we can see that there's a bit of a delay, which if I already have that data seems kind of wasteful. So first we'll write it the quicker way in terms of development time, which is leveraging this component did mount. And then we'll also write it where we manage the state updates ourselves instead of redoing a get with every navigation. So to write our put, we're going to go into app, and we're going to add another route to render our component. So I'll go into this movies thing. I'm going to create a file called updateform.js. I'm going to import React from React. While we're at it, we're going to get use state and use effect. I'm going to declare our update form. It's going to take in some props. It's going to return a form element. My editor didn't like that. There we go. We're going to export this. Okay. I will import this into my app. Import update form from /movies update form. And I'm going to render this under a route where the path is going to be / what did the readme want? Update movie. And then it's some ID, which we're going to use to tell which movie that we're trying to update when we get that out of our match params. And the component that I want to render is our, what did we call it? Update form. So nothing should really change because we don't have this update form set up yet and we haven't navigated there. I'm going to do some basic setup to let us navigate here. We're going to go into our movie component and we're going to add a link so that I can click on a button here and that'll take me to the page where I can update this. So we're going to switch into our movie card, I believe is the component. I'm going to import a link from React router DOM. And we're going to put, where is the save button showing up? Oh. Am I in the wrong component? Let's see. Oh yeah, that is just the movie file. Okay. Yeah, I did not have time to do this project before, so we're kind of winging it here. Yeah, so this is this movie component, and notice how it's managing the state. We're getting out of our props match.params.id, which comes from the route. When we look inside of app.js, when we render a path with a slug in here, with this param :id, React Router is going to match that part of the URL and then give it to us inside of the match object, inside of the params object, under the key that we named that slug, that we named that param. And it's on mounting going and getting that specific movie. And then it also has, this is legacy code right here, component will receive props. We would prefer to do this with component did update or in a functional component with use effect. But essentially what we're doing is we're checking to see if the value of this ID that we matched has changed, and then we go and get the new movie. But this is not connected to any state at all. In the other day's project, where I did the whole find thing based on the ID, we're not worrying about that. We're letting the API manage our state. We're going and getting the movie data that we need based on our route, and then we're rendering that. And I'm going to steal this process for my update movie component. I'm not going to worry about, passing it in some state we already have. I'm just going to go and get it from the API. And while we're here, let's add our link. So let's find where we put our save button. There it is. And let's add our link to, and this is going to be some JavaScript because we want to go into update movie. And then we want to link to the specific movie that we want to update, which is going to be this.state.movie.id. We could also use this.props.params.match.id, which might actually be safer because we'll have that information before the... no, this is fine. We'll have the props match information immediately before the data is fetched from the API, but we have this loading thing render before then anyway, so they're roughly equivalent. And let's make this say edit, or update, rather. Keep it consistent. So now we're going to see that, oh, we have this update button up here, down here, but that's fine. And we can see that that's linking to update movie 0, which is going to take us here, which is where our form is going to live. So I'm going to get back into my update form, and I'm going to make some inputs. Type is going to be text. Name is going to be, what is our movie data shaped like? Let's see. Oh, I guess we're rendering the movie card, so let me look at the movie card. So we have a title, and I will use my state here to set up my basic form stuff. So let's do movie and set movie, and initially we'll make this blank. So use state, and we'll have movie be an empty string, or I'm sorry, title. We'll do the same for director. It's going to be an empty string. Metascore, it's going to be an empty string. And we also have the actors, which is going to be an array of strings. So actors is going to be an array. And let's get this a little bit nicer looking. Okay. So I'm also going to write my handle change function, which is going to take in an event. And we're going to set movie. We're going to spread in our existing movie. And we're going to modify e.target.name with the value e.target.value. So there's our handle change. So this is going to have a value of movie.title and a handle change function as the onChange prop. And what am I missing? Placeholder. Let's give it a placeholder of title. All right, great. Lily just asked in chat, should you use props.history.push URL versus link to URL to navigate? If you're just having a thing where you click on it, it navigates you somewhere, I would prefer using a link. You can also, give a button or a div or whatever, an on-click event that calls, props.history.push. But you can only do that inside of something rendered with routes that's receiving that props. Oh, the key should be stars, not actors. Thank you very much. Props.history.push is mostly there so that you can programmatically navigate somewhere. If we're just doing it with a click, a link is usually good enough. But both will work. So this should be stars. Thank you. And so we're going to add a couple more of these. I'm going to change title to be director. I'm going to change Metascore, or I'm going to change director to be Metascore. And now we get into the interesting territory, because how do we handle stars? Because stars is an array. And if I do it with my normal handle change, it's going to overwrite that array with a string. Also, can I set the value of a text input to an array? That doesn't really make sense. My solution to this is going to be to write a different handle change function for these. And the way this is going to work is I'm going to do a map. I'm going to do movies.map, or movie.map. Sorry, movie.stars.map. I want to map over that array of stars, and for each one of them, I want to create an input. So I'm going to return an input that has all of my good stuff in it. But I'm not going to need a name. We'll give it a star. And the idea behind this here is we'll use the index from this map to set the value of this. So in our map, our callback function takes two values, which is one, the value of that entry, which we could actually use as the value of our form. Now that I think about it, that'll work fine. So a star name, that's one of the values there. And then two, we take the index of that element inside of our array. And so we can set the value to be the star name, and I'm going to have to write a handle change function that's going to accept the index so that we know which star to actually go out and update. So I'm going to write a function called handle star, and I'm going to write this to be a higher order function because I think that's neat. So what we're going to do is this is going to take in an index, and then this is going to return a function that takes in an event. And that is going to perform set movie. We spread in movie, and then we're going to modify the stars key, and we're going to map over the original value for stars, but for that specific index, we're going to replace the star with our event.target.value. So we're going to do movie.stars.map. We're going to not care about we're going to get the value of the star, and we're going to get that index, star index, let's call it to avoid a name collision here. And then here, what I want to do is if my star index is equal to the index, then I'm going to return a e.target.value. Otherwise, I'm going to return the value for star. Some of you might recognize that this could be said a bit more easily with a ternary statement, so I'm going to refactor that right now. I like doing it both ways just so you can see. And if the star index is equal to the index that we received from our higher order function, we're going to return e.target.value. Otherwise, we're going to return the value for star that we already have. So then when I assign a onChange handler, I'm going to call handle star, and I'm going to give it the index. And that's going to produce a function that can handle the event. So, questions with that? I know that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I've never seen two arrows used like that in index and E. How does that work?
So you actually have seen two arrows used like this. This is the pattern that we used for Redux Thunk, where we had our action creator that would accept that was just a function that maybe accepted some arguments like, what was that project? A Smurf. And then we had our dispatch. So it looks funky, but what I'm doing here is I'm writing a function that accepts a value of an index. And that what that function does is it returns a new function that accepts an event. So I'm writing a function that creates a new function. Right? So when I call handle star and I give it an index, this is going to produce a function that takes in an event. So, yes, so Dan pointed out the other way to handle this. I passed the index as the second argument after E when I called my handle stars change. Is there advantage to doing this as an HOC? One, this isn't quite a higher order component. This is a higher order function. It's a function that, well, it's also not kind of a higher order function. I don't know how programmers like to use this term. It's a function that produces another function. To me, a higher order function is a function that takes a function as an argument, but I don't want to make it more complicated than it already is. Like map is a higher order function. I am writing a function producer here. We could have also done this, by doing index and an event. Ultimately, and this would have to take the event here. Ultimately, I don't think it matters too much. Whatever style that you enjoy, I would recommend. I don't think there'll be significant performance differences because in either way, we're technically creating two functions. Uh, Either this arrow function inline or when we call handle star to produce a new function, we're making two functions. Either way works. This was just what my brain wanted to do. But yeah, so we're making a function that returns another function, and the double star syntax looks weird, but the double arrow syntax looks weird, but it's kind of neat once you get the hang of it. All right. So we don't actually have any showing up right now because we don't have any stars in our initial data. But this is where we're going to use that pattern that the movie card does, where it, based on the value of this prop, performs the get request and gets the value of that movie. I also see something in the Zoom chat. I prefer if you type that in Slack because that's hard for me to monitor. So what we're going to do is we're going to perform a get request for our movie. And we can look at how the movie component does that and translate it into hooks. So we define a function called fetchMovie that takes an ID and it goes and performs a get request and then sets the state to be the response. Otherwise, we catch the error. We can actually just copy and paste this in. And I'll have to put a const in front of this. I'm also going to need to import Axios from Axios. And we need to make some slight changes. Instead of this .setState, I'm going to call setMovie. And I'm going to give it the value of res.data. And the rest of this is absolutely fine. I want to run this instead of with component did mount and component will receive props or component with update using useEffect. So I'm going to write a useEffect. It's going to run some callback that's going to run fetchMovie and give it the ID that we currently have, which is props.match.params.id. And that's going to fetch our movie. And I want this to run whenever props.match.params.id changes. So now when I save this, this should theoretically perform a get request and then populate our form with some initial data. Which, that's pretty cool. Okay, so Jocelyn asked, I'm fuzzy on what props.match.params.id is coming from. So if we look in app.js, this is coming from route. Do you remember when we do our render function? We have to make a function that takes in props and then renders our component update form, and then we spread in props. All right, do you remember this? It's actually what we're doing when we render the movie thing. These props that we receive as this argument come from route. And those are history, match, and location. And this is all information about our routing. History is that object that we can use to push and navigate around on, or pop and navigate back. Match tells us information about how the URL has matched our route's path, and location tells us information about the location of our current URL. So what we can always do is we can console log our props and see what they are. So our page refreshes, we see our props, and we get history, location, and match. And history is this object that has a bunch of stuff defined on it. The real meat is in match, where we get this params object that contains ID, and that's equal to 0. And where this comes from is in our route, we specified this param :id. And this colon tells React Router to parse the URL, find what is ever in that position, in this case it's the number 0, and parse that out for us. It then gives it to us as a prop. Inside of the match object, there's an object called params, and then under the key ID appears the value that was in our URL. I can change this name to banana, and we'll see that this object now has props.match.params.banana. And we're getting an error because that's not a real movie. So we can see in this match object inside of params, we now have banana equal to 0. And if I navigate to 1 instead of 0, now banana will equal 1. So that's where that's coming from. All right, and it's getting mad at me, so I'm going to switch back to ID.
Can you expand the left side of your screen with the code a little bit?
Oh,
Is that possible?
yes. I actually want to switch this back to the way it was, because there's no need to do the render props here. If you want an example of that, what the given code does in the movies example is how we'd use render props. And those props are given implicitly when we render a component using the component prop. When we use the render prop, we have to make this function that will receive props and then pass those to our component. Yes, Sean, this is being recorded.
Could you show again how you got the fetch movie into movie?
So in movie, it was already here. I did not write anything in here besides my link.
Got it.
So this already has this member function fetch movie being defined. I copied and pasted it and put it in my update form and changed it so it would work with my hooks. This is probably a good indicator when we copy and paste. We should probably have, when you do your build weeks, you should have a utils file that contains all of your different API requests under names like fetch movie, and it just returns an axios.get, and you're free to then catch off of it to your heart's content. So you don't have to keep doing like axios and path stuff in your components. Okay. So I want to get rid of my key warning. So when we map over all these inputs, I'm going to need to give them a key, and I'll just give them the index. That's normally bad form to give an index as a key because it kind of defeats the purpose, but that's fine. And I don't like how we have that empty form showing up for a bit. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to remove this initial value from my state. Instead, I'm going to make it null. And I'm going to do the whole loading thing. So I'm going to say if not movie, if movie isn't defined, then I'm going to return a div that says loading. So that way I don't get that pop in on the form, and maybe someone has already started typing and we overwrite their stuff. So now we just get this here. Let's add a submit button. So a button of type submit that says update movie. And now we're going to need to write our handle submit function. This is going to take in an event. We're going to call event.preventDefault like always. And then I'm going to make my put request. I'm going to do axios.put, and I want to put to my API, so localhost 5000/API/movies, and then the movie at my specific ID, which is going to be props.match.params.id. And it would have been better form to save this into a variable called ID or something like that and use that to keep our code simpler to read. But I want to keep using this because I know a lot of you are confused on it, and I want you to see it again and again and again. So this is going to get the ID out of our URL. Right? That's the value that we're getting there. We could alternatively use our movie.id. because our movie is going to have an ID in there. But this is fine too. And then we're going to send our movie object along with our put request. If this is successful, then I'm going to get some response data back, which I'm going to console log. But I actually don't need to do any state management, because if I immediately navigate us back to the movie list, it's going to perform that GET request, and it's going to get the updated value of the movie that I've done. So I'm going to do props.history, right? That's another one of the props coming from React Router. And if you're confused on how this works, I would consult the React Router docs. They're pretty nice these days. I'm going to push to the URL that I want to navigate to, which is just slash. I think the instructions say slash movies, but we're rendering that movie list on that root slash. I'm going to catch an error if we have one, and I'm going to console log error.response. So, page is going to refresh. We're going to load. We're going to get our movie, Star Wars, A New Hope. I'm going to click Update Movie. This should do our post request. And do y'all know what I did? Do y'all know what I did? I wrote my wonderful handle submit function, and I did not give it to my form on submit. I want to do that every time. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness! You think at the final week of React at this point, I'd remember to put my on submits on there. I make that rookie mistake literally every time we do this. Okay, Star Wars: A New Hope. I'm gonna click update. That should do our put request. Oh, and I am getting a CORS error because this should be 5,000. All right, so we're gonna do it again. We're going to see if it works this time. So, A New Hope, update movie. That should make our put request, which navigates us back to the movie list, which is going to mount that component again, since we had unmounted it when you navigate away. Make our get request, and we're going to get that updated data for A New Hope. So, there we go. There we go. There's our push. All right. Any questions on this? See a couple people typing.
So do you think, Henry, do you think it's good practice to remain consistent in using class components, or just it's okay to mix it up with hooks and class components?
It's definitely okay to mix it up. One of the advantages of the way that, you know, the components mix together is you can't tell when you render a component whether it's class-based or whether it's function-based. So in a lot of code bases that you'll encounter that have existed for a few years, all the old components are going to be class-based. But if you're writing a new one from scratch, you know, chances are you can just write it using hooks because that's the new hotness, and it lets us, you know, be a bit more expressive, and I like them a lot more. So you can progressively start to update your code base to using hooks. Some places might want to stick exclusively to classes, but I think it's fine to mix them in the same project. So Adam is getting index undefined on your form. Yep. So when we do this function creator approach, we have to pass this index as an argument in order to create the second function, and we got to make sure in this on change we pass that index as the argument.
Can you go back up on my on change? I have it passed in. Can you go back to your function real quick? I think I might be missing.
Okay. Yeah. So here is the on change, and then here is the function where we take an index, and this returns a function that takes in an event. And then what might get weird is we also have to get this index as an argument from the map. And we're comparing those. So, and
mine is literally equal to yours.
Okay.
I'm still getting undefined.
I'll take a look at that in a bit. So Tatiana asked, could you quickly go over one more time what is happening in the handle star function? Yeah, so the handle star function is a function that takes an index. We can ignore the rest of this. That's not relevant here. Handle star is a function that takes in an index, right? That's what our arrow function syntax is telling us. What it returns is, since we're not defining a function body, it's doing an implicit return. And what it's deciding to return is a function that takes in an event. So handle star takes in an index, and then it returns a function that takes in an event. And that function that takes in an event is going to take the event and do nothing with it. Or, no, it'll get the value out of the event because it's an input event. And what we're doing is we're updating the value of our movie. We're updating the value of the stars key within that movie object. We're mapping over the existing array of stars, and we're checking to see if the index of each star that we map over is equal to the index that we had initially passed into handle star, right? We're using this the scope of the function. We're using a closure here. It's getting index out of the closure and checking to see if these are equal. And if we are at the movie star with the index that we had modified, we're going to set its value to be event.target.value. Otherwise, we're going to keep its original value as star. Skylar, if you're getting symbol iterator is not a function, usually that means you're spreading something that is not meant to be spread. So I would check that, that your spread is all right. How is this different than using a regular function with 2 parameters? It's not really. If we did it with 2 parameters, we could do it like this. Right? It would take index and an event. And then with my handle star, I would have to wrap this in a callback function, and then we'd give it the index and the event. I personally think this is actually a little bit more complicated, creating this inline function, you know, that does this thing. I think this is a little bit cleaner. I just like this approach, but both ways are totally fine to do it with this function that takes 2 parameters, and then we create this implicit function, not this implicit function, this inline function that is going to call our handle star with index in the event. Either way, we have to use kind of this layered set of functions. I'm just doing mine in the definition rather than inline. So use what you prefer. And I prefer this way. Okay, and Kevin asked, I was wondering how would the complexity change if you wanted to add or remove stars, for example, wanting to add another star or removing a star altogether? Yep, so we can do adding stars pretty easily. I'll add a button that says add star, and we're going to give it an on-click handler, and I'll call it add star, a function I have yet to define. This is going to be a function called add star. It's going to take in an event because we're going to need to call event.preventDefault to prevent the event from propagating and submitting our form. And what we're going to do is we are going to set movie. We're going to spread in our existing movie. I want to modify the value of stars. I want to spread into a new array the existing copy of movie.stars. And I'm going to add a new star that's just an empty string. And what this is going to do is it's going to add essentially another index to my stars array. And now I'm going to be able to create another input off of that. So when I click add star, I get this new input. And deleting would be very similar. We would be filtering that array and removing the one with the matching index. So that's how we would do that.
I'm sorry, and you said your button, you just did an on-click?
Yep, that's just an on-click handler on the button. And we got to make sure we're preventing default on this event, otherwise it will submit our form.
Can I see your state call again?
Which call?
Your use state at the top.
Oh, yep. I'm setting it to be null because I'm checking to see if my movie is defined down here. And if it isn't, didn't mean to scroll like that. If it is not, then I display a little loading div, which we could easily swap out for a spinner.
I'm curious, what will happen if you leave some of the stars blank, like have them as empty strings? Will it map over them next time you go to edit and just have them empty?
Honestly, that would depend on how the API handles this. a good API is going to validate those inputs, and it's going to see that they're empty, and it's going to discard them. I don't think that the API that we're using now is going to. I think it's just going to save that array because it's a dummy API. So we can check. I'll update the Godfather, and let's see what happens when I click on the Godfather and then click on update. Yep, they're still there. Just getting mad at me about keys. Oh, it's because it was using the star name as the key for those stars, and now that they're empty, it's getting mad. Okay, but yeah, API allows that. We'll learn in backend how you would probably actually structure a request to add stars, so you don't store duplicate data. But yeah, that's how it works for now. So, any other questions with this before we get delete working? Oh, Elijah, what is your question?
Yeah, sorry, I just hopped in, so I don't know what has been asked or not.
Okay.
But I'm having an issue getting props to my update movie component.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm trying to set the value of all the inputs. So when you hit the edit button, so that it populates with the information that's currently there.
Yeah, I'll be showing how to do that in a little bit. The way that I decided to handle this update movie component is we actually don't give it prompts that contain the data of our movie. We just fetch that data from the API. Because, hey, I know the ID of my movie. I know I can get that data from my API. Let's just make it easy on myself. But I also want to show, because this way is fast in terms of developer time, but it's not fast in terms of user experience. I technically already have all this data when I'm here. And when I click update, I'm reloading all that data for no good reason other than my own developer experience. So I'm going to show how to do that prop passing to
sure.
Make,
okay.
Yeah, that a little bit cleaner.
So I got my iterator thing to go away because it was my use state, but now I'm just getting it's getting stuck at the if statement.
What do you mean it's getting stuck at the if statement?
It's just telling me movie not defined when I click update.
Are you defining movie? If it's telling you movie isn't defined, then you probably aren't defining movie.
Okay, where all are we defining movie? I've got it in my state.
Are you using a class-based component?
No, I'm using the exact same thing you're using.
Okay.
I've just been typing it out as you go along, but it's just stopping at my if statement.
All right. Well, I'm not quite sure what the issue is. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to debug everyone's issues right now because we have about 7 minutes till after hours start, and I want to show deleting, and I want to show an alternate state management solution. So I'm going to keep going ahead, and I can take a look at your code after we finish the recording, if that's all right.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
Thanks.
All right. So let's get delete working. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to add a delete button to the movie card, the movie component, so that when we click delete, we're going to delete this card. And the way this is going to work is we're going to go into that movie.js component, and I will add right after my update link a button that says delete, and I'm going to give it an on click, and that is going to be a function I have not yet defined called delete movie. And what this is going to do is oh wait, this is a class-based component, so this needs to be this dot delete movie. And what we're going to do here is we're going to call, or we're going to define delete movie. It's going to take in an event. I'm going to call event.prevent default just to be safe, although I don't think it wouldn't cause any issues to leave it out. And I'm going to make my Axios.delete request. And we're going to make our request to our API, http localhost:5000/API/movies, and then we need to define our ID, which we can get out of our state, this.state.movie.id. Although it might yell at us because that's initially not going to be defined. We'll see. I don't think we'll get an error at runtime. And we're going to do a .then off this. We can console log the response data, but I'm not going to use it because I'm going to navigate back to my movie list component, which is going to do their get request, which is going to update that for me. So this .props.history.push, navigate back to root, and if I get an error, I'm going to catch it, and then I'm going to console log the error.response. All right. So now I'm here at The Godfather. I can click delete, and that deletes The Godfather. And that's it. All right. Any questions with that? No questions on our delete? I can hear someone who's unmuted. I don't know if that's an accident or not. All right. So there are no questions here. I want to move on to how we can handle this entirely within our own state rather than rerunning our GET requests. Oh, Catherine.
Oh, I was going to ask. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no.
I was going to ask, would it be possible for you to, like, either keep the code as it is commented out or, like, in a new branch, do it the different way? Just because I wanted to look at this later.
Yes, I was going to branch from this point so that we can have both. And Catherine just asked, could we use this .props.match.params.id in the delete? Yes. Yes, those are going to be equivalent pieces of data. One's a string, one's an integer. It doesn't really matter, though, in this case. So there's our MVP. And let's do it in the state managing way. So I am going to stage and commit all of my changes, complete MVP using local state from API. And then I'm going to branch off here and call this shared state. Shared-state. Okay. So let's reconfigure the way we have our data stored, because I do not like how when I click on Star Wars, we load this movie, and when I click back home, we refetch all of our movies. That seems very wasteful for me. It's nice in that we make sure we get the most updated data, and the way we're going to do it now, we're going to have to figure out some mechanism to make sure that, you know, we don't fall behind, but we don't have to do all this refetching. So let's take a look in app. This is where we want the shared state for our list of movies to live, because that's really the information that we're depending on at each point further down in the tree. If we take a look at our movie list component, I don't think I saved my update form. Oh no, there we go. Okay, so if we look at our movie list component, this is making the Axios request to get the data for our movies, and it's storing them in local state. I want to pull this up into our app, and so it can have the list of movies, and we can pass those as prompts. Did someone have a question? No? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import Axios from Axios. I'm also going to import useEffect, and we're going to rewrite this class-based code into our hook-based code inside of our app. So I'm going to tear out this Axios request, and I'm going to define a function called getMovies. And that's going to perform our Axios request I'm going to have to update the state management here. I'm going to create a new state variable called movies and set movies. We're going to do use state, and I'm going to make this an empty array. And once we get our response back from the server, I want to call set movies, and I want to give it the value of res.data, or array of movies. Now, instead of component did mount, I'm going to use my use effect. I'm going to call get movies, and I want to run this only once when our app is mounted. So use effect with an empty dependency array. At this point, I can now pass this movies array to my movie list. So I would go into my route. I'm going to change this to be render. I'm going to take in the props. I'm going to render the movie list component. I'm going to spread in the props that route wants to give it, our history and match objects and such. And now I'm going to give it movies as a prop. In here, I can get rid of my component did mount. I can get rid of my constructor because I don't need it anymore. And now I just have to change my references from this.state.movies to this.props.movies. And we should be good. Now, we notice at this point, there's no reason to use a class-based component if we don't have any state in it. So I can change this to a functional component. So I can export default function movie list. It's going to take in props, and then it's going to return this. And it didn't like this for some reason. Oh, get rid of class here. And now I can get rid of my this keyword. So now movie list has become a very simple functional component. And why didn't it like this? Props.movies. Huh. Props.movies is undefined. Oh, I didn't save app. Thought I did something wrong in here. Alright, yeah, so now we're fetching our movies inside of app and then passing that as a prop. And watch as I put the console log in here of fetching movies. We see when our app finishes refreshing, we're going to see that console log show up, fetching movies. And once it finishes fetches, they show up just like normal. But when I navigate to Star Wars A New Hope and then navigate back home, notice how we do not see fetching movies again. That's because use effect with this empty dependency array runs on mount. And while we're unmounting the movie list component when we navigate away from it, we're never going to unmount app. App is mounted when our web page is loaded, and we never get rid of it. So we truly only ever make this call once. If I want to, in some other situation, refresh this data, I would just have to call this getMovies function again. And I'm absolutely allowed to do that. I can pass it as props and trigger it, after our put is done, for example. Or I can figure out how to manage the state myself to update those things. So that's what I want to do. And I see Tanya is typing. So I'll stop and ask and see if we have any questions here.
I can wait till later. It's about my state not changing, and I had a question about it.
Okay, yeah, I can take a look at specific code later, but I'll keep trudging ahead with this implementation for now. So what I'm gonna do is, instead of when I click on Star Wars A New Hope, fetching that data in here, we can reuse the data that we already have in our movies. So what I can do is I can pass as a prop to this movie component the movies array. And now I can go into my movie component, movie.js, and instead of going out and fetching all this data from the API, I can just get my movie out of my props. So here we could instead set our state variable for our movie, and there's a lot of ways to handle this. I'm going to try to do it in the least invasive way here. On component, how do I want to do this? Because I prefer the solution that you all saw the other day, where I do my find inside of this render here and pass exactly that movie. But we could also do it inside this component with component did mount and component will receive props. But I don't like the idea of setting state via props. That's circuitous. Yeah, I'm gonna do my find in this render. Am I? What do y'all want to see? You want to see the find in the render prop or handling it within the component itself? You vote find. Well, we're gonna have to find both ways. We'll do find in the render prop. I think that keeps it a little bit simpler because movie should only be concerned with rendering the movie that it's given. So that's my preferred method. So we'll do const movie, and we'll do movies.find, and we'll get this movie object, and we're looking for where id movie.id is going to double equal our props.match.params.id. And now we can also do an if statement. If movie is not defined, then I actually want to return a div that says loading. So now we've just taken all of this logic outside of our movie component. It does not need to know about fetching this data from the server because we've already done that. It does not need to check this loading state because we've already done that for it. And instead of having any state, we're going to have this entirely from props. So instead of this.state.movie, we'll change this.state to be this.props. Oh, I get an error here. I did not save app.js again. Oh, and I need to update these props. This should be movie, and this should also be movie. Singular. Okay, and there we go. And there we go. And we only see this fetching movies once. We're only making one API. So when I switch back between these, it's instant. I no longer get that delay. I already have all the data we need. Now, this isn't going to work in every case because most APIs, when you're going to fetch the array of data, it's not going to contain all of the same data that if you fetched an item individually would. It's going to be very common. You're not going to get subarrays and kind of the main GET request. It might tell you the title and the director and the metascore, but it wouldn't tell you actors. And you would have to make the GET request for that specific movie to get this individual data. So this pattern is not foolproof. But I saw a lot of people going this approach because that's what we saw in the guided project. So I also wanted to highlight how to do it here. And so we can do the same thing with our update movies. Oh, first, actually, let's fix delete. Because when I click delete for Star Wars, first of all, this .state is null, so I have to fix that. So instead of this .state.movieid, it's going to be this .props.movieid. So when we click delete here, it's going to perform that axios.delete, and that's still going to work. And we're going to navigate back to movie list. The problem is that we're not performing another GET request. So our app's local state does not know that the data on the API has changed. We have to do this manually. We could do this by triggering another GET request here when we know we want to get updated information from the server, or we can do it manually. So I could write a function inside of my app.js called something like delete movie. Let's call it remove movie, actually. And this is going to take in an ID. And what we're going to do is we're going to call set movies, and we're going to provide an updated value of movies that we filter. And for each movie object, we're going to filter where movie ID does not single equals here. I want to use type changing in case ID is a string. So we want to filter out any movies where the movie.id, is equal to the ID that we're receiving as an argument here. And now I can pass this as a prop to my movie component. So I'm going to clean up the props on a little bit. And then let's do remove movie. And this is going to be remove movie. So then in here, I can call, once my request is finished, before I do my history.push, I'm going to call this.props.remove movie, and I'm going to give it this.props.movie ID. Since I already have access to the ID in here, I could do my function creator style approach, but this is fine. This is fine. I don't need to overindulge my my patterns as much as I already have. So now when I click on the Lord of the Rings and click delete, I actually remove that out of my state before I navigate. And we're still only making a single GET request. We're just making sure that our state is in line with what the state of the server is. And I perform the remove movie inside of this .then block, so I'm only doing it in the case that this delete has been successful. So if it fails, we skip the then and we go to the catch block, and I never remove that movie from my state. I wouldn't want to do this, say, out here, because I'm doing this before the Axios request even fires. I also wouldn't want to do it out here, even though it's sequentially after the Axios.delete. The Axios.delete is going to produce a promise, and before that promise is resolved, we're immediately going to delete that movie out of our state. So I want to make sure to do that inside of my .then block. All right, do we have any questions at this point? All right, see a couple of people typing. Is there a way to refactor the delete using res.data from the delete call? Yes. I could, instead of, well, it actually depends. Let's look at our response object, because sometimes a delete is going to return 204, which means successful in no data. Here, I believe it's returning the ID of the movie that we deleted. So instead of giving it this .props.movie ID, we could give it res.data, which is also going to be the movie ID that we just deleted. But that's pretty much equivalent. We wouldn't generally do too much with the information returned by a delete, because we know what should happen. We don't really need any other information other than we were successful in our deletion. But that entirely depends on the API and the context with which we are using it. All right, and Kevin is typing. Kevin says, I was under the impression that if you wanted to use this .props, you would need to call constructor props and super props. Yes, that is partially my fault. I misled you all into this idea that the constructor has to take in props, and then we must call super props. We don't have to do this manually. If I do not define the constructor, then it's going to inherit it from react.component, and that's going to do the dirty work of setting up those props for me. I pushed the idea that we had to write our constructor that accepts props and calls super props because it's weird if we don't. You know, we have enough trouble with props in our functional components, so I didn't want like props to appear nowhere and then suddenly I'm using this .props. So I apologize for misleading you a bit, but we technically do not have to do that. It will be handled for us. So when do we need to call the constructor in classes? Almost never. If we need to set our initial state, we can do that inside the constructor, but we can also just define the state out here. So you really don't need to write a constructor most of the time. The case where you would want to write a constructor is when you're like defining some initial state based on the props that you receive, but not the props that you want to be saved into this dot props, which is almost always a bad idea. And I'm sure someone who's more familiar with class-based components could tell me other cases where we really would want to write a constructor, but by and large we can ignore it unless we need some specific behavior that has to happen in there rather than in, say, component did mount. So, yeah. And at this point, we have no state in here. We could easily refactor this into my good old dummy dum-dum functional components. So, all right. Let's do the same thing for our update. So, the idea behind our update is basically the same thing. If I go to my update form, excuse me, I am fetching the movie out of, from the API and setting that, and then I'm handling this form and doing all of this. Instead, I can receive this as props. So I'm going to write my render function. I'm going to take in props here. I'm going to render update form, and I'm going to give it some props. First, let's drop this down here. Let's spread in props. Nisa asked, do you need a dot catch and a dot then for axios.delete? Yes, we always need dot thens and dot catches, because if we don't have a dot catch, for one, if this throws an error, it will crash our React application if we have an uncaught error. But two, we generally want to do things based on the success or failure of our API requests. We don't really want to just shoot it out there and hope for the best. So this is where we would also take into account maybe setting a loading variable on and off inside of the dot then, or inside of a dot catch, setting that error message into our state so we could display it. Console logging it is great for development, but generally we want the user to see the error so that they can, understand why the movie didn't delete successfully for some reason. Maybe someone already deleted it, and we need to tell them that. But this is kind of me moving quickly here, and also because I don't think the server sends back good error messages, or at least ones that we'll encounter that will be good. Okay, so we spread our props into update form, and now I can do the exact same thing with the find. At this point, this should probably tell me that I should refactor this into some pattern that I can reuse, perhaps a higher order component form that is going to, contain this logic wrapping this component. But I'm not going to do that here because you've already seen enough complexity. Here. Skylar figured out his error. He had an ampersand instead of a $sign in his template string. So there we go. Alright, so I'm going to copy paste this in here, which your developer sensor should be tingling. Don't copy paste. Great use case for a higher order component, because that's essentially what this render function is. And we're going to pass in that movie that we found via props. So now inside of my update form, I am going to declare, I'm going to destructure my movie out of props just so I don't have to change variable names. And I can get rid of my use state. I can get rid of my fetch movie. I can get rid of my use effect. I lied. I still need this state because it's used for my form. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the initial state of this to be props.movie. And I want to set the initial state of my form to be what I'm receiving from props. I don't need this fetch movie function. Just to be safe, I'm going to check and see if the value of props.movie ever changes. I'm going to set the value of movie to be props.movie. So just being sure that, like, if somehow our route navigation changes and the value of movie updates, that we're getting that into our form. And then on handle submit, we're going to put our movie changes. That's fine. And let's see if this works. So T2, let's update this. Let's do T3, because sequels are always better. So I'm going to click Update Movie, and we navigate back to our main page. And again, we see that this hasn't updated our state because we're not doing our GET request again. We're not seeing fetching movies. But if I refresh my page, we do indeed see that it became Terminator 3 Judgment Day. So I'm going to handle this in the same way. I'm going to write a function inside of app where my state lives and call it update movie. And this is going to take in an object. I need a const here. I'm going to call this updated movie. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set movies. And I'm going to map over movies. And I'm going to check for each one of these movie objects if movie.id is equal to our updated movie.id. Then I want to return the updated movie. Otherwise, I want to return our plain old non-modified movies. This is a great use case for a ternary, so I'm going to refactor this. Movie.id is equal to updated movie.id, which I realize now I spelled this wrong. Then I want to return updated movie. Otherwise, I want to return the normal movie. So we can also make this an implicit return to further slow this down. Although, since I'm zoomed in, overflows our line. This is what it would look like not zoomed in. But we'll just wrap this in set of parentheses so we can indent it like that. There we go. So now I can pass this as a prop to my update form. So update movie is going to be our update movie function that we defined. And then inside of here, I am going to call props.updateMovie, and I'm going to give it the movie object that I have before I perform my history.push inside of my .then, because I know my put has been successful. I'm going to save app, going to save update form, and now I'm going to modify this back to T2 because T2 was a better movie than T3. In fact, I don't remember ever seeing Terminator 3. So I'm going to update this, and we go back here, and we've manually updated our state to match what we've received from the server. We could also do something, just for the sake of completeness. Instead of writing this update movie function on our own, in this case where we know that after we've done this put, that our data has been, oh, and I should, getting ahead of myself, this should not be movie, this should probably be res.data, because when we perform our put, we're going to receive as a response.data the actual movie object that the API now has. It might have made some modifications. You know, maybe it changed the capitalization on things. Maybe it suddenly got a new ID. Maybe, you know, there's some other information updated. In the case of a put, we're almost always going to receive back the object that we updated, and that's what we want to give to props.updateMovie. But let's say we don't want to do this manual state managing ourselves. I just want to trigger another GET request to get that updated data. We can absolutely do that. I already have a function here called getMovies that will perform my GET request and place it into my state. So I could pass that as a prop to my update movie. I could give it getMovies. GetMovies, not getMoves. Well, I could use that. I'm not a talented dancer. And then in here, I'm going to call props.getMovies. And what this is going to do is once our put request is finished, it's going to fire off that get request to get the updated data. So we'll see that when I update this to Terminator 3 again, and I click Update Movie, we navigate back to the home, and we perform another get request. And that is going to get the T3. Instead of doing our local state management, we just trigger another get request to get the updated data. So I went for a while there. Do you have any questions here? Catherine asked, which is best practice? So it depends. It really depends, and I know that's not a satisfying thing to hear. Doing the GET requests in every single one of the components has its benefits and its negatives. So the benefit is that you're always guaranteed to have the most up-to-date version of your data. Since you're always hitting the API for that data, you know you're never displaying the user outdated data, which might be very important in some applications, like a calendar, and not important in others, like a to-do app that only they are using, so you don't really have to worry about the data changing out from underneath them. Doing the manual, one of the other benefits is it simplifies our experience as developers. So in my React build week, I started writing all of my components in this very GET request heavy way because I didn't want to worry about my data being incorrect. I just wanted the best data from the server, the most recent data. And then I started refactoring into this style where I was like, you know what, this is actually pretty wasteful. Something that we could do, for example, is we could keep the GET request when we click on one of these cards. And then when we click update, instead of doing that GET request again, maybe we pass the information from here to our update form, right? We could render this as maybe a modal that pops up on this page, or swaps all of these into inputs, or something like that. So we don't have to, so we can cut down on our GET requests, but we still get some of that state simplicity there. Doing it entirely with, as few requests to the server as possible is going to be more important in applications where we really want the user experience to feel snappy, where we're not worried about having old or invalid data from the server, and where we want to save bandwidth, which is going to depend on the application. So best practices is use enough GET requests to make sure you have valid data, but don't use too many. And also don't drive yourself crazy. At the end of the day, your productivity is usually more important when you're shipping an MVP than it is being perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good. Because once you have your MVP, once you have the barest set of features you need to ship a viable product, that is when you can start optimizing for things like this. And as you can see, I know if you haven't done it before, it might not have been obvious how to switch between them, but it didn't actually take all that much work. Mostly had to move some lines around, had to define a couple functions, which we've seen a bunch of times at this point, right? Like this filter is something we've seen a whole bunch of times to perform removal. And this map to update one thing, another thing we've seen a bunch of times. So you're going to start seeing these patterns, and it's going to become easier and easier to switch between the styles as you encounter them. Yeah. All right. Do we have any other questions? I always wonder how long to wait when I ask that. Because I'm fine waiting while we're live. But I wonder, I don't watch the YouTube videos. When you're watching the YouTube videos, you're just like, ugh, Henry, stop pausing. I've also heard that I'm still entirely legible at 2x speed, because I'm well aware of how slow I talk. So maybe the YouTube folk are using that. All right. Any questions before I close this on out?
Thank you, Henry.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. I see some people typing. It might just be a thank you, but I'll wait. Can confirm. Totally legible at 2x. Yeah. I listened to myself at 2x, and I was like, oh man, that makes me feel bad. But I had a philosophy professor once tell me that when doing public speaking, you should talk slow enough that you're certain that every person in the room is bored. And I was like, aha, got that one down. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a lot of fun doing this, and good luck on your sprint challenge tomorrow.